Imagine a world where the very land you thought was beyond reach suddenly becomes a battleground, not for gold or oil, but for something even more elusive, territory in one of the harshest environments known to man, a frozen, barren wilderness where survival is a challenge, and the rules of engagement are yet to be defined. This is Antarctica, a place that has remained shrouded in mystery for centuries, where no single nation can claim ownership. But as the world changes and temperatures rise, the question remains, what happens when the ice thaws and the world is forced to face the truth about the land they've all ignored for so long? The year is 1961. A monumental agreement is signed by 50 countries, including the United States, Russia, and China. This agreement, known as the Antarctic Treaty, lays out clear rules. No one can establish military bases, and no one can mine the valuable resources hidden beneath the icy surface. For nearly 60 years, the treaty has preserved Antarctica as a neutral zone, untouched by the conflicts that plague the rest of the world. But here's the catch. The treaty expires in 2048. That's less than a quarter century away. What happens then? Will countries return to their original desires of controlling this vast, icy land? What if global warming alters the landscape, turning Antarctica into a much more habitable place? Right now, 7 countries have staked their claims on parts of the continent, but the land is not divided in neat, organized sections. There's no single, unified Antarctic nation. Instead, scattered across the continent are research stations, 70 of them, built by over 30 different countries, stretching across the ice and snow. During the summer months, more than 4,000 people live and work here. But come winter, that number drops to a mere 1,000. The Antarctic Peninsula, a slightly warmer area, has become a focal point for 4 nations: Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and the United Kingdom. The reason is clear. This part of Antarctica is the most accessible, the most manageable for human life, and it lies close to the coastlines of Chile and Argentina. Despite these claims, 2 countries stand out with a different vision: Russia and the United States. These nations insist that Antarctica should remain a place for global cooperation, where no borders or flags can divide the land. A utopia, if you will, for science and peaceful progress. And that vision is rooted in the past, back when Antarctica was almost claimed by Russia. Back in the 19th century, during the Great Age of Exploration, new lands discovered by adventurers were often immediately claimed for their home countries. Russia, determined to stake its claim on the New World, was the first to confirm Antarctica's existence. Russian sailors, led by the fearless Fatih Bellingshausen and Mikhail Lazarev, set out on an expedition in 1819 with nothing more than hope, courage, and their desire to uncover the unknown. They didn't know what dangers awaited them, how long they would be gone, or what they would find. Yet they pressed on, battling freezing temperatures, violent storms, and an unforgiving landscape. On July 16, 1819, 2 ships, the Vostok and Mirny, set sail from Kronstadt with a crew of 190 men. They were prepared for a 2-year journey, carrying supplies and provisions, but nothing could fully prepare them for what they would endure. The ships themselves were different. One swift and nimble, the other strong but slow. The crew had no idea if they would survive the treacherous voyage. No communication with the outside world, and no certainty that they would find anything at all. Yet, despite the seemingly endless odds, they only lost 3 men during their 751-day journey, a testament to their skill and resilience. Their travels took them across more than 92,000 kilometers of open ocean. They explored the islands of Polynesia, discovering 15 new islands, which were later named in honor of Russia. It wasn't until January 28, 1820, that they finally reached their ultimate goal, Antarctica itself. As they crossed the Antarctic Circle and skirted along its icy coastline, they made history, becoming the first explorers to confirm the existence of the frozen landmass. In the centuries that followed, Antarctica remained a place of wonder and mystery, untouched by human borders. But as the climate warms and the ice begins to melt, one can't help but wonder, what's next for this great frozen expanse? Will it remain a symbol of international cooperation, or will the scramble for control begin once again? Only time will tell. In early February, the expedition approached Antarctica once again, aiming for the coastline known as Princess Astrid Coast. However, the weather was far from favorable, and they couldn't get a clear view of the land. By the time spring arrived, it was impossible to navigate along the coastline, so the ships took different routes to reach Jackson Port, Sydney. Their second attempt to reach Antarctica came in November. This time, they discovered new islands, including Peter the First Island, Shishkov Island, Mordvinov Island, and Alexander the First Land. On January 30th, 1821, disaster struck, the Vostok sprung a leak, and the expedition had to be cut short. They returned to Kronstadt on July 24th, 1821. Emperor Alexander I was pleased with the expedition's success and honored the crew members, but he made one crucial mistake. He did not claim the land. It seems the emperor believed that Russia already had enough territory, especially with the complex situation in Alaska. And of course, there was the question of managing and protecting such a distant, frozen continent. What use could such a barren land serve? For many years, Antarctica was of little interest to anyone. Explorations took place sporadically, but no one laid claim to the land. The Russian discovery was not disputed, and the continent was largely forgotten until the potential value of Antarctica became apparent. Fearing that the Soviet Union might seize this treasure, other nations quickly took action. In 1959, they signed a special convention, which came into effect in 1961. According to the treaty, Antarctica belongs to no one. Military activities, including the establishment of military bases and the passage of military ships, are strictly prohibited. In the 1980s, Antarctica was also declared a nuclear-free zone. Today, 50 nations are parties to the agreement, with dozens more observing. Currently, around 50 scientific stations operate in Antarctica. Russia maintains 7 permanent stations and 1 field base, but these are only a few of the remarkable facts about this icy land. Here's more. Life beneath the ice. In Antarctica's subglacial lakes, life might exist. Life that has evolved in isolation for millions of years, separate from the rest of the world. There are over 140 subglacial lakes discovered in Antarctica, but the most famous is Lake Vostok, located near the Soviet and later Russian Vostok Research Station, which gave the lake its name. Underneath the lake is a thick 4-kilometer layer of ice, but the lake itself doesn't freeze, thanks to the geothermal heat from beneath. The water temperature in the lake hovers around 10 degrees Celsius. This thick ice layer may have served as a natural barrier, preserving unique organisms that have evolved completely separately from life on the rest of the planet. There are 2 main theories about the life forms residing under the ice between the Vostok station and the lake. One theory is American, while the other is Russian. The American team, based on results from drilling in the 1990s, discovered only ice above the lake, ice formed from the water slowly rising and freezing. Their team, led by Scott Rogers, used metagenomic methods to analyze the samples, identifying gene sequences from 1,623 species. 6% of these sequences were from complex organisms, eukaryotes, or life forms with a defined nucleus. These findings were surprising, as such complex life was not expected to survive at such depths. Among the identified organisms were bacteria commonly found in fish intestines, species that do not exist independently of their hosts. There were also sequences linked to rotifers and mollusks, leading the American team to conclude that fish and crustaceans might exist in Lake Vostok. The Russian scientists, however, were highly skeptical. They pointed out that the drilling process used technical fluids contaminated by bacteria from the surface. Without clean drilling, distinguishing local organisms from external contamination was almost impossible. Russian experts argued that true Vostok life could only be claimed if genetic sequences were found that had no match to anything known on Earth. Eventually, Russian scientists from the Petersburg Institute of Nuclear Physics discovered DNA from bacteria that didn't match any known species. This DNA was so unique that they couldn't even classify it within a specific bacterial group. 14% of its genes had no counterparts in any known species. According to Sergei Bulat, if this DNA had been found on Mars, it would surely have been considered extraterrestrial life. But this was still earthly DNA. However, these were bacteria, simple, single-celled organisms. The search for more complex life forms, such as eukaryotes or multicellular creatures like fish, is still ongoing. But so far, no evidence has been found. The Alps in Antarctica. Antarctica is home to a mountain range comparable in size to the Alps. These mountains are called the Gamburtsev Mountains, named after the Soviet geophysicist and academician who led the expedition that discovered them in 1958. The mountain range stretches 1,300 kilometers in length and ranges from 200 to 500 kilometers in width. The highest peak rises to 3,390 meters. But here's the most fascinating part. These vast mountains lie beneath a thick layer of ice. On average, the ice sheet above them is 600 meters thick, but some areas have ice depths exceeding 4 kilometers. Antarctica lacks time zones. Antarctica is the only continent on Earth that doesn't have time zones. There is no single official time in Antarctica. Scientists and expedition members base their schedules on the time zone of their home country or the time zone of the station that supplies them. Antarctica holds 70% of the world's fresh water. Surprisingly, Antarctica is also the driest place on Earth. However, there's no contradiction here. The fresh water is locked in ice. The continent receives a mere 18 millimeters of precipitation annually. To put that into perspective, even the Sahara Desert gets 76 millimeters of rain each year. Antarctica is home to one of the clearest seas on Earth, the Weddell Sea. It is regarded as the most transparent sea in the world, a distinction it fully deserves. The clarity of the water is a result of the lack of pollution, which is rare on most of the planet. In the Weddell Sea, the water is so clear that objects can be seen at depths of up to 79 meters, almost matching the transparency of distilled water. Icebergs in Antarctica can be truly immense. The largest iceberg recorded to have broken off here measured a staggering 295 kilometers in length and 37 kilometers in width. Yes, you read that right. 295 kilometers. Sometimes researchers encounter icebergs with strikingly smooth edges, which seem to have been shaped in an almost unnatural way. Who could have created such precise structures? We can ponder this question later, but for now, let's move on. Despite the absence of permanent residents, Antarctica has its own domain name, .aq, and a unique phone code, +672. The continent also boasts a non-official currency, the Antarctic dollar. Not all of Antarctica is covered by ice. Many envision Antarctica as an endless icy desert with nothing but snow and ice, and for the most part, this is accurate. However, there are sizable ice-free valleys and even sand dunes scattered across the continent. Don't be deceived, though. The lack of snow in these regions is not due to warmer conditions. Quite the opposite. These areas experience even harsher conditions. In the dry valleys of McMurdo, winds can reach speeds of up to 320 kilometers per hour. These strong winds cause moisture to evaporate, leaving the valleys snow-free and ice-free. The environment here is so close to Martian conditions that NASA even used these valleys to test the Viking spacecraft landers. Now, let's tackle a fascinating question. When did Antarctica become covered in ice? The prevailing scientific consensus is that the Antarctic ice sheet formed around 30 to 35 million years ago. Since then, the ice has reached several kilometers in thickness in some places. But here's something interesting about historical maps. Up until the 16th century, many cartographers had detailed knowledge of the northern shores of Europe, Siberia, and even several islands in the Arctic Ocean. What's more, they seem to have an understanding of Antarctica's outline, suggesting that they might have even set foot on the continent. Then, beginning in the 17th century, the knowledge of Antarctica was completely forgotten. It was as if the southernmost continent vanished from memory, and all northern territories became a blank spot, terra incognita, on the maps. This remained the case until the 19th century. Take, for example, the Piri Reis map. Created in the early 16th century, it shows a depiction of Antarctica without ice, just 500 years ago. Wikipedia describes this as follows. Some believe that the image on the southern part of the map proves that ancient cartographers were aware of Antarctica's existence, though most scholars dismiss the notion that people of that era had reliable knowledge about it. But Piri Reis's map isn't the only piece of evidence supporting the controversial theory that ancient cartographers knew of Antarctica before it was covered in ice. Consider the 1531 map of Orontius Phineus, which clearly shows Antarctica in fairly accurate proportions, even depicting the mythical Hyperborea at the North Pole. In the 16th century, explorers were well aware of the existence of a non-icy Antarctica and Hyperborea. This was around the time of Ivan the Terrible. An alternative theory suggests that Earth's climate was significantly warmer before the 16th century, with the North Pole being situated on the west coast of Greenland. During this time, medieval sailors freely navigated to the shores of Antarctica and even the North Pole, where there was little ice and conditions were relatively warm. But in the 16th century, a sudden shift in the poles occurred, ushering in the Little Ice Age, which led to Antarctica quickly becoming covered in ice. This version of events is supported by records describing the dramatic onset of the Little Ice Age at the start of the 16th century. Interestingly, there's another island covered in thick ice, Greenland. Adam Olearius, a 17th century German traveler and geographer, wrote in his book Travel of the Holstein Embassy to Muscovy and Persia that in 1389, Greenland had almost no ice or snow. Icelandic and Norwegian ships could freely sail there, land, and trade. Giovanni Pontano, an Italian philosopher from the late 15th century, also gathered numerous reports from explorers about Greenland, describing it as a fertile, warm place with many harbors and vast forests. Further research supports that, in the early 15th century, Greenland was a thriving area with large Viking settlements. For instance, in the city of Gardar, there were hundreds of stone houses, trading shops, blacksmiths, a church, and even a bishop. The last confirmed reports of Viking expeditions to Greenland came from 1410, showing that in the 15th century, Greenland still lived up to its name as the Green Land. But by the 16th century, reports from sailors passing by Greenland were full of alarm. They noted that the coastline had become impassable due to thick ice, preventing them from docking. By 1586, Danish ships sent to Greenland couldn't even approach the shore due to ice several hundred meters thick. This sudden transformation of Greenland, from ice-free to completely covered in thick glaciers in a matter of decades, raises significant questions. The Greenland ice sheet, which now has a thickness of more than 3 kilometers, formed in just about 50 years, which contrasts sharply with the official explanation for the formation of Antarctica's ice sheet, which supposedly occurred over 30 to 35 million years. Researchers have raised many questions about this rapid change. Evidence of a sudden climate shift, known as the Little Ice Age, in the early 16th century, seems to support this view. One example from the 15th to 16th centuries comes from the Monk's Chronicle, written by Benedictine monks in the Austrian town of Melk along the Danube River. The chronicle recounts the year 1502. In this year, a massive flood occurred, starting on the eve of the feast of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, and continuing for almost 10 days. Rivers overflowed in all towns and castles along the Danube, spreading so widely that they became navigable. The flood destroyed entire houses, and 2 houses in Melk, along with their inhabitants, were swept away, carried eastward. It buried fields and orchards under sand, toppled trees, destroyed vineyards, and sent stables, barns, and all kinds of goods floating down the river day and night. The Danube raged so fiercely through major cities and villages that scarcely a single house remained standing. These severe floods continued across the region for 6 consecutive years, from 1502 to 1508. In the summer of 1525, a sudden freeze came. In Vienna, in the middle of the summer of 1525, a terrible frost arrived so abruptly that people who didn't make it inside quickly froze to death, collapsing on the streets. Birds turned to stone and fell from the sky. Life in the cities and villages ceased for months. Countless people perished from the cold. For many years, most wildlife in Europe disappeared. That same year, the Danube froze so completely that people, riders, carriages, and wagons freely traveled across it. All wells and water sources froze, making it impossible to draw water. In another medieval Polish chronicle, a similar event is described. In this year, the terrible frost and blizzards arrived unexpectedly. Many poor people and merchants died from the cold on the roads. Even Roman chronicles from 1525 mention, in that year, a terrible cold descended upon Rome in the summer. All the surrounding lands quickly became covered with snow and ice. Many people and animals died from the brutal cold. Almost every European medieval chronicle from 1525 speaks of an unexpected and extreme cold, widespread death from the freezing temperatures, and the subsequent sharp decline in temperatures across much of Europe. From this point on, winters became noticeably harsher. Sigismund Herberstein, in his notes on Muscovy from the 16th century, wrote, in 1525 to 1526, there were such severe frosts that the earth cracked from the cold. The frost was so intense that water thrown into the air, or saliva from the mouth, would freeze before it even hit the ground. All the trees died from the cold. The trees across Russia turned black the following year. The roads in the Moscow region were littered with frozen bodies of people and animals. While this remains just a theory, it's one that's increasingly capturing the imagination of many people. We wanted to present it for your consideration. Now, let's continue. Active volcanoes. In terms of seismic activity, Antarctica is relatively calm. However, it is not without its volcanoes, some of which are quite active. At least 2 volcanoes have erupted in the last 200 years. The most well-known and active of these is Mount Erebus, often referred to as the volcano that guards the path to the South Pole. Largest asteroid crater. There's also the largest asteroid impact crater located in the area of the Wilkes Land region. The diameter of this crater measures around 482 kilometers. Scientists believe it was formed around 100 million years ago by an asteroid that was at least 48 kilometers in diameter. The dust and debris raised by the asteroid's impact and explosion caused a prolonged cooling period, which is hypothesized to have led to the mass extinction of much of the flora and fauna of that era. That's enough for today. Be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. See you soon!